So it looks like we're good to go, Heather, if the technical part of things is ready to go.
Yeah, if you have 7, I don't have a time in front of me.
Yeah, no, it is.
Perfect.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, great.
Okay, the City of Bowling Green Planning Commission meeting for April of 2021 will now come to order. Jamie, please take the roll.
Mr. Earhart,
Here.
Mr. Betts,
Here.
Ms. Ennis,
Here.
Mr. McComber,
Here.
Mr. Michael,
You muted, Rich.
He's on the screen.
Mr. Michael,
Here.
Mr. J. Phillips,
Here.
Mr. K. Phillips,
Here.
Ms. Sleek,
Here.
and Mr. Spittler.
Here. All right, great. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. We've all received a copy of the minutes from last month's meeting. Did anybody have any corrections or changes that they wanted to suggest or request?
Your microphone.
Didn't want to hear what you said.
He never would have seen it, Heather. Jeez. Did anybody have any changes they wanted to request for the minutes? Folks, anybody? No? Okay. Seeing none, the minutes are approved as read, which brings us to our lobby visitation for this evening. The time when anybody who's here tonight who wishes to come forward and speak to Planning Commission may do so. All we ask is that you do not talk about anything that's scheduled for public hearing, since we will get to that in a few minutes. Is there anyone who wishes to come forward tonight? No takers? Okay, with that, we will close lobby visitation and move on to our first public hearing of this evening. And that is a rezoning request of approximately 1.4125 plus or minus acres located at 304 North Church Street, 316 North Church Street, and 305 North Main Street from the I-1 institutional and S3 planned institutional zoning classifications to the B3 Central Business District zoning classification. And the City of Bowling Green is the applicant. Heather.
Thank you. We're going to get the map up here that was in your staff report.
So while we're waiting for that, I will just say that normally we have our staff report, then applicant testimony and public testimony, but since the applicant is the city, our staff report will also serve as our applicant testimony for this public hearing.
Thank you. This request is comprised of 7 total parcels for 1.4125 plus or minus acres. The current 3 structures that are part of this are 304 North Church Street, where we are sitting right now, which is zoned I-1 institutional, 316 North Church Street, which is zoned S-3 plan institutional, and 305 North Main Street, which is zoned S-3 plan institutional. 316 North Church Street is the rental house that you can see outside the window here over by me. And then 305 North Main Street, I guess I can say now, is the former senior center, since they are in the process of vacating and pretty much done as far as I am aware. As Mr. Betts indicated, the property owner and the applicant for the rezoning request is the City of Bowling Green. Under section 150.111 of the codified ordinances, all of the criteria have been met as far as posting in the paper, mailing to the adjoining property owners, and posting signage on the frontage of all the properties. The existing zoning classification of I-1 lists the permitted uses in your packet. We also listed S3 plan institutional, and those are our famous S3 districts that Planning Commission approves the site plan. So as time goes on, we've tried to remove more of those just because they tend to not be as clean as other zoning districts. So we're hoping that does continue. But again, this is several sites of different zoning that we're trying to get under one zoning classification to really clean that up. So as far as the proposed zoning classification, that's the B-3 Central Business District. In your packet, we also put a comparison of the bulk and density regulations. So you'll see I-1 and S3 listed compared to the proposed B3. There are clearly differences in the setback requirements. B3, again, it's downtown, so there really are 0 setbacks. So that would be the difference there compared to the I-1 and S3. As far as the proposed use, we are proposing that a new city building be built, and I gave you a preliminary site plan. As you can tell, I underlined preliminary because it is not final whatsoever, but I thought it was a good idea to at least give you an idea of what the plan is so far. It's not to say that the building could not be built there now under the current zoning, but again, it's about cleaning up all the zoning classifications. As far as public improvements, there are public utilities available, which include 8-inch water main on North Church Street, 12-inch water main on North Main Street. This is also a combined sewer area with an 8-inch combination sewer on North Church Street, 8-inch and 21-inch combination sewer on West Oak, and an 8-inch and 21-inch combination sewer on North Main Street. Electric is available on North Church Street and West Oak Street. And of course, there already are public sidewalks along North Church, West Oak, and North Main Street. As far as traffic, nothing has been discussed yet as far as details, but there is discussion of closing Oak Street for North Main Street and keeping the access points from North Church that are already there and North Main Street for some better traffic flow. As far as adjacent zoning, you can view that on the map that was part of your packet and also on the screen. But that is Exhibit A. So essentially to the west, we do have B2 general commercial, and we do have R2 single family residential. To the north, we do have R2, but a bulk of that zoning is B3 now. To the east, we also have B3, and to the south is also zone B3, of which of course is the public library. As far as the staff recommendation, we do recommend approval of this request for several reasons. Again, we look at the 7 Bowling Green principles from the future land use plan. We also look at our famous intention statement for Bowling Green. We look at the questions on page 49 of the land use plan, which again go back to the principles. The proposal, does that help the current public, future potential residents? Does it attract our target market? And does it make BG more competitive in the region? I won't read through every single principle in our comparison sheet, but if you do have questions, let me know. But essentially it is a very accessible area as far as biking, walking, all the surrounding neighborhoods, very close. Of course, having a new fresh building will really be a positive, appealing first impression, but still recognizing the historic character of the existing building, the facade of the senior center. So that's section 1, where we look at the principles. Section 2, we look at applying the actual action items of the future land use plan. So of course, we have a whole section dedicated to the downtown. And I think the most important factor in that is that downtown really is the key to Bowling Green. Almost not, maybe not as important as East Wooster Street. Downtown has been said how important it is in our future land use plan. So there really isn't necessarily an action item that says, you know, this shall be zoned B3. But I do think it's really important that the city building stays in downtown, and the city has said this for several years. So again, we're finally realizing or implementing this really critical goal. So we also thought another important part is that, you know, on page 34, we talk about there's not really a whole lot of gathering places downtown, and in the future land use plan, you know, it talks about how important it is having these places to congregate. So again, having more green space as part of our preliminary site plan, we thought was really important too. One part of the future land use plan does talk about improving livability and aesthetics of the downtown, and again, establishing multiple gathering places. Another downtown action is encouraging city and other public agency tenants in the downtown. So certainly we wouldn't be a tenant, but obviously a very critical property owner and user of the downtown. So I think really that hits the head for that action item. As far as the proposed land use map, we call it that fuzzy map because really it's not meant to be prescriptive, but it does give us an idea that this area labeled as dark pink as intensive mixed use residential and retail pedestrian oriented definitely fits in those principles priorities of that map. As far as section 10, which is on page 49, again, using the 7 principles, it says city projects, physical improvements by the city can do much to implement the vision for Bowling Green. So certainly this is, again, another aesthetic improvement that's really critical to the city. Under section 3, we normally compare requests to the community action plan. In this case, the downtown really isn't addressed in the community action plan directly, but as you can see in the diagram, downtown clearly is labeled as a central point of our community. And again, building connectivity off of that downtown to the surrounding neighborhoods and campus, et cetera, is really important. So after all that, in summary, we do feel this fits within the future land use plan. 7 principles. It's about highly livable urban form, local flavor and character, positive appealing first impressions, easy access to health and fitness, and good neighborhoods. Additionally, the B3 does allow that intensive mixed-use residential and retail, pedestrian-oriented, which is again suggested by the land use plan as being a really critical component of our community. The plan also recommends a focus of redevelopment at the core of the city. Again, our core and our adjacent neighborhoods. So really, this is the jewel in our city crown, is what the future land use plan often says about the downtown. As I've already said, this puts several parcels under the same ownership in the same project under the same zoning classification. The uses permitted in B3 are and will continue to operate as an appropriate transition to the surrounding residential areas to the west and northwest, also allowing for essential services and easy access at the core of the city. This would be the same zoning to the north and the south and the east. The bulk and density requirements of the B3 would really match the surrounding area to allow for similar development and character, which is, I think, really critical as we look at this new building. And a key difference is there are no minimum parking requirements or maximum lot coverage, so it does allow us to really increase that density in the future if needed, and does allow that flexibility. The B3 classification summarizes the purpose of the zoning district. It really perfectly aligns with the request. So under 150.30A, the purpose of the B3 district, this district encompasses the functional center of the city. It provides for commercial, governmental, and institutional activities serving the entire community. To encourage convenient access to the central business district activities, multiple family structures are also allowed within this district. But again, the key was, it says right there, really governmental entities are really critical to our downtown. So we also include site pictures of the property and the parcels in your packet. And we also include some pictometry, so you can see some aerial views of different directions of the site to give you really more of a totality view of that site. And then, of course, we give you the map that's already on the screen, and then a copy of the application, legal descriptions, and then Exhibit C is, again, that preliminary site plan. So I think that's it as far as the staff report, unless you have any questions. We did not receive any phone calls or letters after mailing letters to the neighboring properties, along with it being posted in the newspaper.
I have a question, Heather. It's less about the zoning request than it is just about the practicality of the new facility that's being planned. And that is just, I mean, there's no question the city has needed a new city administration building for years and years and years. But I'm just curious how the footprint compares to this one, you know, office space and whatever is needed by the city government to function going forward. How does that play out?
I was going to reference Mrs. Shredder, our municipal administrator. I don't know those details exactly, so if she has a better idea, we would appreciate your input, Lori.
Good evening, Planning Commission. We are still in development of those plans. We do plan to roll them out publicly. We have a designer, under contract that was authorized by the City Council. They are working on those designs right now. And we are looking at balancing, our current needs with reasonable future needs, of course, leveraging technology, understanding the need for a larger public space for the council chamber, to gather people together. I don't think we have an approximate square footage just yet, unless, Mayor, I'm remembering something. Around 31,000 square feet is what we're looking at. I think our current facility is about 17,000.
Wow.
Wow.
That's great. Huh, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's really why I was curious to know, is just about, thinking ahead, because I know it's got to last for a while and, serve a good purpose and, okay, great.
That's a nice increase in
Does
space. You guys
anybody-
are going to get lost in
Anybody
there.
else have any questions for Ms. Streher? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's nice.
Are there any other questions, period, for Heather?
Heather, and maybe I presume it's for you, it's okay, but if I read this from looking at the proposed site plan, just to get an idea of kind of along the same lines, the footprint. And I think you'd mentioned about potentially terminating Oak Street. Is that accurate, what I'm gathering there from this drawing? Maybe, sorry, I guess it is.
Were you just wondering about
Yeah,
the
is
Oak
that
Street?
what I'm seeing there? I think that's what I heard.
That is under consideration as part of the plan. We've been talking with the public library next door about our space in here and the best way to traverse our space. But again, as Heather had mentioned in her report, certainly creating areas that have greenery around a building are desirable in the downtown. And that street is currently just a one-way street. It has some limited parking on there, and the footprint of the new building really goes up almost across the sidewalk there. So
Right.
that would also create some buffer space there.
And then it's similar, okay, that's what I gathered. Thank you. Similar question, I guess, to get an idea of what the proposal is, yes, that house right there out the window behind you guys. Is that then gone and this, where am I going, northern edge? I guess is that
Yeah,
the
I think if
totally
you
north
look
parcel of that?
really right now where that road comes off of Main, and,
Yeah.
you know, if you looked at that through, that would exist. And yes, if you just picture it, continuing through all the way to Church Street there. So you know how
Gotcha.
right now you can turn in off of Main Street there and get into what is
Right,
existing
okay.
City Lot 7.
Right,
And that just continues on. It does curve out a little bit there.
got ya. Thank you.
Sure. Again, more plans will be under development, and we will certainly be sharing those publicly as they get under more development. We had done this initial proposed site plan for City Council to review and determine if to go forward, which City Council has approved. Now we're in this next phase, which again will then come back for public sharing at that point.
Any projected timeline?
We are looking at potentially maybe later this year, but more likely early 2022 to start construction.
Other questions? Other questions for Ms. Scudder? Okay.
All right, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
And if we have to call you back up, you can just reset your Fitbit for the night. All right. Any questions for Heather before we proceed to our public testimony? Okay. So moving to public testimony, is there anyone here this evening who would like to come forward and ask questions or raise concerns or anything of that nature about the proposed rezoning request? Okay, seeing none, we will close our public hearing and move to our discussion about this.
I think it matches all the things that
Yeah.
we've looked for in the zoning plan that we worked on 7 years ago.
Right, yeah, that have been in development
Yeah,
all that time in
yeah.
various forms. The other thing I think is great is, I mean, it's been a long time to get to the point where there was actually a site identified, because I
Right.
know the city was really wondering about that for a number of years, where the new building would go, and the fact that this, utilizes the facade of the old post office, which I remember from being a young boy, actually going inside, and yeah, I just think it's great on so many levels, but it also makes so much sense with the central business district zoning, and the fact that it's going to stay right here in the center of
Yeah, that's
that
important.
activity. Does anybody have anything that they feel strongly they'd like to add? If otherwise, I am going to make a motion on this rezoning. Okay, I move that we recommend to City Council that they rezone this parcel with the B3 Central Business District zoning classification. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Jamie, could you please give us a roll call vote on this?
Mr. Earhart,
Yes.
Mr. Betts,
Yes.
Ms. Ennis,
Yes,
Mr. McComber,
Yes.
Mr. Michael,
Yes.
Mr. J. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. K. Phillips,
Yes.
Ms. Sleek,
yes.
and Mr. Spittler.
Yes.
Great, so it is unanimous, so that is our recommendation that will be passed on to City Council, which brings us to our second public hearing of this evening, which is The annexation of approximately 18.51 plus or minus acres off South Winter Garden Road, identified as parcel numbers R63-510-260-401-001-000 and R63-510-260-401-001-005 from Plain Township City of Bowling Green, or excuse me, from Plain Township and the City of Bowling Green is the petitioner. Well, excuse me for that here. So here again, our staff report from Heather will serve as our applicant testimony. Heather, what can you tell us?
Thank you. So on February 18th of this year, the planning department received a copy of the petition that was accepted by the commissioners and approved for approximately 18.51 acres located off of South Winter Garden Road from Plain Township. The annexation request is due to the acquisition of property by the City of Bowling Green for the expansion of Winter Garden, St. John's Woods Nature Preserve. There is also a very small sliver of land that is owned by Carleen Krebs as part of this that is included in the annexation. This annexation would eliminate an island that is currently surrounded by the city corporation limit, as you can see by that map outlined in red. That little sliver is only about 20 feet wide by 342 feet deep. That is behind an existing barn that Carleen still owns. So again, it's very hard to see there. As required, letters notifying the adjoining property owners were sent on March 5th. Attached is a letter received by Mrs. Krebs, which included a copy of a declaration of restrictions that this property be utilized as a nature preserve and perpetuity. And so a copy of that letter was given to you along with the declaration. There is also a letter from the Parks and Recreation Director giving you a little history of the property, along with her request that the Planning Commission consider the R-C recreational conservation zoning that we'll talk about later. So that is pretty much it as far as the staff report. Unless you have any questions for me?
Are there any questions for Heather?
I have a question about the parcels. I guess here they're to the left. I'm thinking of Winter Garden Park. What are those going to be used for? Is it expansion of the park that's going to be like on the other side of the street or
No, are you referencing the ones outlined in red that are to the west of Winter
to
Garden?
the west?
Yes, those have nothing to do with this. That's
Yeah, I was gonna
privately
say, I don't
owned
think they're-
property. So Winter Garden currently would be to the north, east, and south of the island that we're looking to annex.
That's the brown part.
Yeah, you can see kind of that stone drive from Winter Garden to the north and the woods around it. The city owns several acres
Okay.
north, east, and south of that annex property we're talking about.
Keep going. I always found these maps so confusing.
Can you see it better on
I see.
this one? Okay.
Want me to point? Can I point?
This is the park, yeah?
So this is, oh, you got me, oh, you got it sideways there for me. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's. You went too
Now,
far.
now I took it away from you.
Okay, so to the north there, you'll see that stone drive from Winter Garden.
Yes, you go in,
That's
you
all
park.
park.
Yeah,
The nature center,
right.
you go back this way, this is all trails,
Yeah.
over here's all park. Up to Sand Ridge, you remember that entrance over
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
gated. And then this is all part of the park too.
Right.
So, and you'll see that water feature over there, that's
Right.
all part of the park.
Right.
And so that property outlined in red, with the exception of Carleen Krebs' narrow parcel we discussed, would now be part of Winter
Got it.
Garden, along with this piece that has frontage on Winter Garden, but that is not needing to be annexed. That's already in the city,
Right.
a little over 2-acre parcel.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, I hope people on Zoom understand that.
Are there other questions from Heather? Anybody at home have any questions for Heather?
Guess I've got one small question just to clarify. I see we're talking about 18.51 acres, but I'm looking at an ordinance that was passed that references 20.384 acres.
I'm
What's
so
the-
glad you brought that up,
What's
Bob.
a couple acre difference?
I'm not quite sure how it went through the county that way because that is not correct. If you click on what the city owned the parcel and the legal description, it's 18.35. And then if you add the parcel that Carleen wanted split off to keep as part of her property, it's 0.16 acres, which where we got the 18.51. We don't know how the 20.384 came to be, besides we did buy again that parcel that's already in the city along South Winter Garden. And we don't know if that's how it got confused with that legal description, because we assume it's just a cut and paste issue where they cut and paste maybe out of the purchase agreement with the Black Swamp Conservancy. We're not 100% sure, but it's been
Okay.
cleaned up. It's going to council properly, but it is 18.51 acres, approximately 18.51 acres.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Nice catch, Bob.
Bob's good. He's been around, you know?
Wow. If there are no more questions for Heather, we will move to public testimony. Is there anyone here this evening who wishes to come forward and ask questions about the annexation or raise a concern? Okay, seeing none, we will close the public hearing. And I mean, this is basically pro forma. We just
As
need
someone
to-
who walks around
Yeah.
out there a lot, that just makes sense,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, well, it's great.
And the more we can add to our parks, the
Yeah.
better I like it.
Yeah, especially that area is very nice. If no one has anything to add, is there a motion?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
The motion is to what?
To approve the annexation of approximately
Okay, it's just to
18.51.
get the annexation and then we do the zoning separately.
Yes,
Yep,
exactly.
yep.
Yes, right.
Okay.
And again, this is, we're not actually voting on the annexation ourselves. We are voting on a recommendation to city council that
Right.
they approve the annexation. Jamie, could you please take a roll call vote?
Mr. Earhart,
Yes.
Mr. Betts,
Yes.
Ms. Ennis,
Yes.
Mr. McComber,
Yes.
Mr. Michael,
Yes.
Mr. J. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. K. Phillips,
Yes.
Ms. Sleek,
Yes.
and Mr. Spittler.
Yes.
And unanimous, so we will definitely recommend that to city council. And which brings us to our discussion of the interim zoning for that parcel for approximately 18.51 plus or minus acres off South Winter Garden Road, identified as the parcel numbers included here, which we've already heard, so I'm not going to repeat them again. Due to the annexation request, City of Bowling Green is the petitioner. Heather, what can you tell us about this? And I know that your comments are clear in the report, but what?
Sure. Well, first of all, under the zoning code section 150.120 through 121, that describes interim zoning and the process of how that zoning is determined. So under that section, I do have to recommend the current zoning under the Plain Township zoning resolution, which is actually R-1 residential. So certainly we have several residential categories that could be applied. But in this situation, you can do what you would like to do as far as a recommendation. You do have a letter from the Parks and Recreation Director requesting the R-C Recreational Conservation District, which is something the city intentionally created quite a few years ago to really protect parks, and it seemed like a very good fit for zoning. So she is requesting that you all consider that. Now that does apply, that would apply to the 18.35 acre parcel, but as far as Carleen Krepp's parcel, we would say that likely R-2 single family would be the best, since as you can see by the map that was included in your packet, it is R-2 single family now. So that seems reasonable to keep that same classification. But again, it's up to you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I guess that kind of confuses me. I just assumed that we would use the same zoning classification for all of it, since she's turning it over in perpetuity
I do too.
for, it says, the
Not-
nature preserve,
Not
right?
that narrow parcel. She still owns that narrow parcel. I know it's hard to see, but see that little arrow I tried to draw towards that parcel? She still owns that 20 by 342 foot parcel. She still owns that. So that's not part of the park. It's the 18.35 acres that are part of the park. She wanted to keep that little sliver, split it off to, there's a house there and a barn there now, and she wanted a little bit of a buffer there. So that's not part of this. So she still owns that. But
So
it
that
still is
property
part
is
of the-
being annexed,
It is.
but it's not part of the park. really.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
But it makes sense if there's a house there, the zone.
Yes, there's a house and a barn there. Correct.
Excuse me.
And I apologize, it's so hard to see because when you have the corp line there and then you're drawing the boundary around that, it's hard to see that little parcel.
Right, and I'm sorry, so you said the existing zoning for that small strip of land out there right now around it is R2?
R2, yeah.
Correct, the one in
R2
the
single
city,
family.
but
Okay.
the sliver now under Plain Township is zoned R-1 residential. They don't have all the various single-family zonings that we do. They only have the R-1 residential.
Right. Okay. All right, so it seems as if then the large parcel logically would be the R-C recreational conservation zoning. But I guess it's kind of up for grabs in terms of whether it's an R1 or R2, since we have that option, which would be the better fit for that small strip. Heather, do you have anything you can, again, your recommendation has been, your official recommendation has been noted, but do you have anything you can add to the distinction between R1 and R2 that might give us a little guidance here?
Well, I would definitely shy away from R1 just because the closest R1 is really quite a distance away. It's not adjacent, so I don't think
Right.
that would probably make the most sense. But the basic difference right now in the zoning code is that R1 has a 35-foot front yard setback and R2 has a 25-foot setback. That really is the major difference. The other difference is that there's a minimum lot size requirement that is larger in R1 versus R2, because again, R1 is more of like a rural residential compared to R2. But again, since it already is R2, it seems having that property all in the same zoning would make sense.
All right. Other questions for Heather related? Well, I would move then that we recommend an interim zoning of the R-C recreational conservative for the larger parcel and the R-2 for the small strip parcel. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, been moved and seconded properly. Jamie, please take a roll call vote.
Mr. Earhart,
Yes.
Mr. Betts,
Yes?
Ms. Ennis.
Yes.
Mr. McComber,
Yes.
Mr. Michael,
Yes.
Mr. J. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. K. Phillips,
Yes.
Ms. Sleek,
Yes.
and Mr. Spittler.
Yes.
Okay, once again, unanimous. So that recommendation will go to council for them to consider. Which brings us to our next agenda item tonight, which is a rezoning request for approximately 2.97 plus or minus acres on East Wooster Street located between 1616 and 1630 East Wooster Street, identified as parcel number B07-511-200-301-1004510 from B2 General Commercial to S2 Planned Commercial, and Bowling Green Lodge LLC is the applicant. As is our policy, we will set this for public hearing at our next meeting, which will occur on the 5th of May. Is that correct, Heather?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So we will have a public hearing for that at that time, which brings us to reports for this evening. Judy?
Okay. We had two variance requests at the zoning board. C. George and Laura Jory at 1452 South Orleans Avenue requested a variance to allow the construction of a 10-foot by 12-foot accessory structure, which would encroach 5 feet into the 5-foot required setback from the side property line to the west and would encroach 2 feet into the 5-foot required setback from the rear property line to the north. The second part of that variance request was to allow the construction of a 13-foot by 82-foot 2-inch driveway expansion, which would encroach 3 feet into the 3-foot required setback from the side property line to the west. One of the reasons for the extension in the driveway was the fifth wheeler that his son brings when he comes to visit for a couple of weeks. So this week, both of these requests passed, I think it was like 3-2 on
Very
both of them.
close, yeah.
And then the second one is Scott and Michelle Rule have requested a variance to allow the temporary use of a structure as a short-term rental at 975 West Wooster Street for up to 12 months, which is zoned R2 Single Family Residential. They bought the house next door to them because it seems they had an experience with a tree falling on their house, and they were unable to find temporary living housing accommodations in Bowling Green for the several months that they had to be out of their house. There was a lot of debate on this, and I will tell you that this is just a temporary use of the structure, and it only goes for 1 year. So it passed on a 3-2 vote, and that's the rezoning report, Mr. Chair.
Wow, oh, very interesting.
It was exciting.
Yeah.
Judy always says that about zoning board.
I
doesn't
do.
she?
I think the zoning board is exciting.
That's true, that's true. Heather?
Okay, well, I have a pretty short and simple report. I just wanted to give you a zoning permit update because we were surprised how high they are so far this year. So far we've issued 91 permits compared to 52 at this time last year. So, given the state of the economy, and so we were surprised by that. So far we've issued 11 single-family housing starts compared to 9 at this time last year. Last year we've had 1 industrial warehouse basically permit issued compared to 0 so far. Generally, that picks up a little more, I think, later in the year, so we'll see how that goes. As far as new commercial industrial permits, we did finally issue the Speedway rebuild permit at 1650 East Wooster Street. And then we still have 2 permits on hold, one for adding apartments to the second floor of 121 East Wooster Street. And then Bowling Green Healthcare Real Estate on South Dunbridge is still on hold due to COVID. Subdivisions, none right now. We do have some minor splits we review, but really nothing to report on those. Community Action Plan East Worcester Corridor Report. Update to the zoning code is continuing. We've given them a couple sets of comments back, and I think we're at the point where we might have a little bit more of a meatier document to show you in maybe the next month or two. So that'll be really exciting. Again, it's just a very complex project. I'll leave it at that. It's something I think will interest you all, though. As far as the Community Action Plan and East Wooster Street again, we actually had an update at City Council on Monday evening, April 5th, and I gave you a copy of that document that was submitted by Greg Rabinet on council. That does give an update to what's been implemented and what's outstanding, and you'll see it's quite exciting that really over half of the recommendations have been implemented. Now, a lot of those do relate back to the zoning code update, but again, it's been a big investment for the city and really critical to really implement those recommendations. As far as some other items, we're still waiting on the 2020 census numbers. We did report the new census boundary or the city boundaries to the census last month. Historic preservation ordinance that was passed by city council on March 15th. And we did submit the checklist and ordinance to hopefully be certified as a certified local government through the State Historic Preservation Office. We submitted that on April 1st. And then council did pass the annexation also on Monday of the property on Bowling Green Road East that you had reviewed prior and recommended the M3 Business Park interim zoning. I just thought it was important to loop back to you all so you could see what council has decided upon when you give them a recommendation. So that is it, unless you have any specific questions for me.
Questions for Heather? Apparently not. Okay, well, with that, thank you all for being here tonight, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Yes. Hi. Good, how are you? Good.
Well, all right.
I don't know why I'm losing my voice, but I am.
So you need a project? Yeah. Okay, yep.
Unexpected.